Hey there, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Late Morning. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Thanks so much for stopping by and appreciate you taking the time. So again, good morning. Welcome to Late Morning. A couple of announcements before we get started. Next week, Wendy Ryerson is going to be with us. Wendy sits on the IPAI Board of Directors. She's a longtime instructor for us for many, many years. And she's also chair of the IPAI's Education Committee. And Wendy is going to be talking with us about the CIAO Code of Conduct and the new ethics committee that was formed at the end of last year in association with that Code of Conduct. So it's going to be a great topic. Hope you can stop by next Thursday at 11 o'clock. Today we are going to be joined in just a few moments with Jeff Lee. Jeff is the Lake Villa Township Assessor in Lake County, and Ellen Berkshire. Ellen is an attorney with Verros Berkshire, and they're going to be talking to us about commercial valuation in the time of a pandemic, something we're all experiencing right now and everyone has lots of questions about, so it's going to be a great conversation with them. A couple more quick updates I just wanted to share with you. The IPAI, we have moved around a few of our conferences and workshops to help accommodate the current COVID-19 situation. So if you're curious about what our current schedule is, it's on our website, ipaieducation.org. You can go there, click on the course schedule button at the top in the top menu, and you can see all of our 2020 course schedule has been updated to where we're at right now. So if you're curious where courses are going to fall later on this year, just go ahead and go to that spot and look at it. Our normal qualifying series for those wanting to obtain their CIO has been moved to September, and our Chicago qualifying series for those wishing to obtain a CIAO has been moved to mid-July through mid-August. And both of those will be completed in plenty of time. If there's anyone out there who's taking those courses to obtain a CIO in order to file for election, become a township assessor, those series will be completed in time to allow you to be able to do that this November. So again, on our website, in the main menu, go to course schedule. Our updated 2020 course list is there right now. So with that said, let's go ahead and bring Jeff and Ellen in. Hi, good morning, Ellen.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Great.
Jeff, if you can hear us, we can see your name, but I think we can't see your camera.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you though.
Why is my camera not working then?
See, these are the fun things that happen when you're doing things live.
Absolutely.
Hey!
Thank you for having me.
There we go.
Hey, that's right. Hey, thanks for being here. So welcome to Late Morning, or as I've started to refer to it, at least here at home, is how long is Josh's hair this week? So Ellen and Jeff, again, welcome. We're glad that you're here. I gave some brief introductions to you just a couple minutes ago as you were being into the call here. But Ellen, I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and what kind of law you practice, and just a little bit more about who you are and sort of the kind of work that you do?
Sure. I've been practicing law since about 2003, and in this 17-year practice, I've been primarily focused on real estate and, in particular, property taxation and ad valorem tax assessment appeals, and the process of assessing and appealing through informal conversations with local assessors, all the way to litigating before the Property Tax Appeal Board and in the appellate courts. So that's been my primary focus, and my relationship with IPAI is that I have not only taught classes for, I guess it's been 7 or 8 years now.
Yeah.
I've also assisted in drafting some of the legally associated courses that are offered through IPAI.
Yeah. And Jeff, hey, welcome. Glad to have you here. You're the Lake Villa Township Assessor in Lake County.
That's correct.
So tell us more about yourself. How long have you been doing that? Have you always been in assessment, or you have appraisal background, or?
Seems like I have it all, and it seems like I've been here longer than I care to admit. I got my CIAO in 1986 at the age of 6 years old, maybe.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I started in Avon Township, worked there for a number of years. Then I jumped the fence and moved over to the dark side. I was a real estate tax consultant where I would evaluate and file appeals for clients all across the country. I did that for about 8-9 years. Then I jumped back over the fence and went to Warren Township here in Lake County, where I was a commercial appraiser there. Warren Township is home to Gurney Mills and Six Flags Great America and
Sure.
a lot of big industrial commercial properties. And I've been here in Lake Villa Township since 2005 as the assessor.
Very cool. Oh, great. Well, thanks both of you again for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you here and taking the time to be with us. So, you know, Jeff, this is an interesting time, right, to say the least, for any number of reasons. When you look at your township in particular, and you're in Lake County, for those who didn't hear the first time, you know, what are you sort of seeing in your township or in Lake County and the northern suburbs there? What kinds of changes are you seeing in the market, or what are you hearing from folks about you know, assessments in general?
Basically, since tax bills have gone out the last couple of weeks, we've been getting calls from not only homeowners, but the commercial industrial owners also, and they're looking for ways to reduce their expenses because their incomes are so much decreased, and they're looking for tax relief right now, and they're looking for tax relief in the future. And as we all know, there's really nothing we can do for the current year tax bill situation, but they're looking at things, the way to reduce their expenses, and taxes are a major component of that expenses for them.
So how do you think the current situation is going to play into 2020 assessments as far as, you know, commercial or industrial property goes?
It's such a moving picture. There's so many variables. It's difficult to wrap your head around. And there's a couple schools of thought that are going on right now. And one is don't change anything, because on the valuation date of 1/1/2020, the situation didn't exist.
Sure.
But the other school of thought is we have to recognize what's going on in the market, and we need to provide some kind of relief as best we can.
Yeah. Ellen, you know, you're on the other side of things sometimes. You know, what do you see? What are you talking to what are you telling your clients? What are you hearing from colleagues who practice in, you know, property tax law and represent commercial business owners?
Sure. So obviously, COVID has created a hyper situation that is impacting all human beings, and not only how we interact with each other, but how we interact with property. And so it is hard to wrap your head around. And so for me, I kind of created this little mantra in my own head, and this helps me walk through the process and talk to my clients about it. And that is like, I reflect, I reassess, I take a step back and relax, and then repeat the process. So when I say reflection, I think about this in two ways. And one is my legal mind. And in reflecting on, okay, well, how does this impact 2020 assessments and those going forward? I look to the statute. That's what gives us guidance as attorneys practicing in this field. And there's a couple different places in the property tax code and elsewhere that give some guidance as to how we should deal with this situation. Obviously, this is unprecedented and we don't know for sure, but Article 9 of our Illinois property tax code talks about general valuation procedures, and it gives the authority to assessors to revalue property in years other than a general assessment year. So we kind of have that covered. They can make an adjustment. How do we do that? There's another section of the statute, section 9180, and I won't get into too many of the details of the nitty gritty of the law, but that allows for pro rata valuations. Now, those pro rata valuations in that statute, you know, historically has been used for situations where you don't have your certificate of occupancy or other things yet. But certainly we could make a transition to the impact of COVID on that. Another section of the statute that I turn to is talking about damage or destroyed property. And interestingly, that section of the statute actually says you can make an adjustment for a natural disaster or a situation where the property has been rendered unfit, or the customary use is no longer able to be done. because of a natural disaster or accidental means. Now, certainly when the governor closes the state and says you can't open your restaurant, the customary use of that property has been impacted. And that is exactly what that section of the statute says.
Yeah.
And we
you've
also
even had a number of counties also filing emergency
Yes.
disaster areas as well.
Yeah, and that's Article 13. And historically, that's been dealt with, where there's a tornado. And I'm
Yeah.
sure some of your listeners live in areas where there's been a tornado, and they actually get notice from the assessor that says, fill this out if you've been impacted by this natural disaster that's been declared in this area, and we'll go from there. Now we have a situation where you don't have to send the form because everybody's been impacted.
Right.
And then one last thing on my reflection of the statutes is that not within the tax code, but we have something called the Disaster Relief Act.
Mhm.
And you see some foresight by our legislators, and they actually use the term epidemic in the section of the Natural Disaster Relief Act. So all those things kind of tied together go to my legal reflection on how do we get authority to do this. Now, the next question is, how do we reassess?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really it's interesting. I mean, interesting, right? When you're sitting, when you're living through this, we're gonna, 5 years from now, we'll be able to look back and be like, oh well, we could have done this different, or we didn't, realize that trend when it was beginning to emerge. But right now, as you're sort of dealing with this and going through you're just sort of figuring it out day to day. I think that's true for a lot of assessors, a lot of folks who work in the assessment field in general. So, Ellen, what are you seeing? Are you seeing anything yet in market data as far as assessments or appraisals go?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. We have the difficulties of dealing with the statute that says we have to value on the lien date. And then we have the issue of we're supposed to supply market data in order to support our position. And obviously obtaining market data during this time is going to be difficult because there aren't going to be a lot of clean sales of similarly situated properties.
Right.
So we're going to have to think outside the box. We're going to have to get creative. We're going to have to think about other ways to make adjustments. Maybe we're going to have to be flexible in our reliance on market data and have to say, okay, well, here's some listings from before COVID. Here's some listings after. Here's some trends we're seeing. And right now, I think we're all in that sort of gathering data phase, gathering, reflecting, and then repeating that process because it's fluid and everything's changing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think about something like a hotel too, right? I mean, oh my gosh, how do you even begin the process of evaluation of a hotel, right? In this environment that we're all working in right now. I mean, Jeff, are you seeing anything different up in Lake County? Or are you kind of on the same wavelength?
I think everybody's on the same page, in the same unfortunate boat. But in doing some research on getting prepared for this presentation, I went to the IAAO website and they had a presentation, what was the name of it? Assessing COVID-19, What You Need to Know. There was a real good presentation given by Tim Wilmath, I believe his name is, and he's an appraiser down in Florida. And he actually had some great economic indicators that would showing where prices have gone, where sales have gone, and he tried to link it with the different property uses so that you could say, okay, retail is impacted heavily, industrial may not be impacted heavily, the office market's changing, and he really gave some really good information. I was really quite impressed by his presentation and the data that he supplied. That is available on the IAAO website as a webinar for free. And there's two other speakers that talk about other issues, just dealing with how your office is closed and how to work remotely and things like that. But Tim's presentation was in the beginning. You can download his slides also. I thought it was a very valuable presentation, and it kind of gives me a little bit of a insight on where I might want to go with my valuations and how I might want to approach it. Because again, like Ellen has said, is like you keep reflecting, keep thinking about reassessing, relax.
Relax, very important.
And then start again. And it's really been an ongoing process because this ordeal is changing every day, every week, and something new is popping up that you have to react to.
Yeah. Alan, I love that reflect, reassess, relax, repeat. I almost like want to have that printed and framed, you know, and like
Put it
hung
on
on the
a
wall,
t-shirt.
right? Yeah. You better copyright
It,
that before someone.
it helps
Yeah.
me get my head around it because, you know, your mind can play tricks on you during this, and
Yeah.
you need to ground yourself in something. And for me, it's been a way to ground myself, just going through that cycle and over and over and over. And one thing that Jeff made me think of is in how valuing property during this time and looking at the statutes, reflecting on that, is maybe we have an initial 1/1/20 date, and then we have some sort of post-COVID valuation, and it could be an appraisal, it could be just a vacancy adjustment, it could be some other type of adjustment, and then you go to the statute and it says, oh, you can do pro rata valuations. It allows an assessor to do that. So, you know, for the first 2 months of the year, maybe I'm at my 1/1/20 value, but for the last 10 months of the year, and will to be seen, my post-COVID valuation will be X, and then maybe in the last few months of the year, we'll see an improvement, and we'll be able to go to a different value, and then we can pro rata it across the board. Of course, everything depends on deadlines and timelines and time frames in this,
Right.
in assessing. So we have to consider that too. And that, but you can look at all of this and contemplate it for future years as well.
Yeah. Yeah. This is going to have a lasting impact, not just for 2021, 22, 3, 4. I mean, it's probably going to be a couple of years before we really start to see what impact that this has had on assessments and in the market in general.
And on how people interact with buildings.
Yes, absolutely. Just a quick reminder for folks, if you have questions for Alan or Jeff, go ahead and just type them in to the broadcast here, and we'll bring those up and we'll get those answered for you. Oh, it looks like we do have one question that's come in from Crystal Smith. Hi, Crystal. Thanks for watching. Ellen, could you quote those sections of the statute again that you were talking about earlier?
Sure. The property tax code is 35 ILCS 200. The specific sections that I'm looking at are Article 9, Section 9-160, which relates to general valuation. Section 9-180 relates to pro rata valuation. And Section 9-190 relates to damage or destroyed property. And I know in the traditional sense, we don't have damage or destroyed property, but we definitely have an economic impact. And the interesting language in that section to me is the property is unfit for customary use.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a mom and pop restaurant, my
Right.
property is definitely unfit for customary use. And then there's also Article 13, which is reassessment in disaster areas. And then not within the tax code is the Disaster Relief Act. That's 15 ILCS section 31. And I can always email those out later or whatever.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much for going through that again. You know, we've seen in some counties in the states, some of those counties that have declared disaster areas themselves, they've been shifting some of their deadlines for property tax payments for the year. They've been pushing out, you know, deadlines for what late fees may be incurred, and trying to help give a little bit of relief in the current year to taxpayers. I mean, Jeff, what relief is out there for property owners in a time like this? Even, you know, going toward assessments next year, and if we do provide relief, is that going to cause some sort of a tax shift, you know, within the assessments of a jurisdiction? I mean, are you seeing anything like that, or have you been talking to folks about relief in
It's
those
always
ways?
it's always a concern. What you're going to do, your actions, how is it going to impact everybody else? You know, you got to be concerned about it. You got to be aware of it. So I was doing just some raw calculations on the county numbers as a whole, and if the commercial industrial database were to shrink 10%, the shift would affect the residential by a 2% increase in their taxes. So there would be a tax shift if that scenario were to play out. I don't know if that's going to be what's going to happen, of course, but you know, it's something you have to be cognizant about. Another aspect that the county did was to make Lake County is making 4 payments. So you have quarterly installments instead of just 2 installments. So that's helping people a little bit. You know, it's about the best that they can do besides just waiving late fees and things. Unfortunately, there's no way to stop the tax cycle and the tax bill. Some of the things that I've been doing is talking to some of my local realtors and people that I've had some dealings with and trying to find out what their impacts are. You know, I've had people saying that they're not collecting rent, that the apartments are deferring rent or reducing rent. So all that's going to play out in the income and expense statements that we're going to be getting for this upcoming appeal season. It's going to be interesting. Is this going to be a one-year blip, or is it going to be a long-term ramp up to back to normal? When we try to do an income and expense statement, we always try to stabilize. And so you can, if somebody did a re-roofing or something and they have one spike in 1 year, you can say, okay, well, that's kind of average. This is where you should be. But is that really going to be appropriate for this year? You might say, okay, this year, given what we know, here's what we have to do to the valuation to make it correct and provide some relief. We're talking about doing things, I'm thinking about it personally, and we're talking about it here in the county between all the other assessors, is how do we approach it? Do we actually not change everything and let it go to the board of review? Or do we try to be proactive and make some wholesale adjustments to all property classes, property types that are impacted? There's some varying degrees of impact. You know, you got high impact, medium, low, or maybe even no impact. So you got to kind of analyze those things to see what is really playing out in the market. And the other thing that's really of issue here in Lake County, and it's a little bit different throughout the state, but we're looking to complete our assessment rolls for 2020 in July timeframe. So, you know, we're talking about 6, 8, 10 weeks that we've got to really complete our work. And that's a short, tight deadline that's going to be constrictive of what we do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that relates back to assessors are going to have to do something in a mass appraisal type of methodology. They're not going to have the time, the resources to go and look at the impact of this on every single property. I just hope that they're flexible when it comes to informal discussions, and I'm sure they will be with property owners and attorneys and practitioners. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm asking clients, especially the super concerned ones or ones that are being super impacted, to document what's happening. If they're getting letters from their tenants asking for rent relief, gather those up, make sure you get those over to your local assessor or your attorney or whomever. Gather up information about rent abatements that you're providing, lease terminations, anything that you're doing as far as rent, lease renegotiations, etc. Because those are actual data points that assessors and attorneys can use in looking at the impact.
Yeah.
The other impact you got to watch out for, and I don't know really how this plays out yet, but you know, the federal loans and reimbursements that they're giving to these property owners, is that really offsetting some of the losses that they're seeing? So, you know, hopefully we can gather that type of data too and see what kind of impact that's going to have on the whole income and expense stream also.
We've had another comment or another question, I should say, come in. This is from Mark Armstrong in Kane County. Hello, Mark. Thanks for tuning in this morning. Mark says reassessment in disaster areas is addressed by section 13.5 of the property tax code, and 1320, he says, section 1320 requires that after disaster area are completed, assessing officers must, quote, equalize the assessment in the same manner and subject to the same laws and rules as original assessment, unquote. So Mark's asking, so why wouldn't global reductions return the valuations to their original levels by equalization? Mark, thank you for asking such a thoughtful and thorough question.
Let's get him online and make him answer his own question.
Yeah, right. I'm about ready to dial him up here.
Leave it to Mark. It's equalization will capture some degree of the impact of COVID, but it's certainly not going to capture the difference between the impact to a grocery store owner versus a mom and pop restaurant owner versus a hotel owner. It just won't capture the specific differences and impacts to different properties. And it is a nice tool, certainly, to equalized. But I just think it would fail to capture the entire impact to specific property types.
And do you have the data to warrant what kind of equalization factors you're going to place on some properties?
Right.
That's a difficult situation also.
Yeah. We've had another question come in. This is from Bob Common in McLean County. Hello, Bob. Thanks for tuning in. So Bob's asking about, he says, you know, anticipating a high volume of commercial appeals, which we haven't even started talking about, you know, border review and PTAB and the implications of this on that. He says, but possible high volume of commercial appeals. He hears and accepts what Ellen's saying, but he also is, you know, being thoughtful about the taxing body attorneys that are out there, particularly school districts.
Yeah.
And so even a justified reduction in 2020 payable in 2021 has a potential for a significant reduction in taxing body revenue. Do you guys anticipate legislation from the federal or state governments to help address some of these items? I have not heard anything out of the County Assessors Association legislative committee about this, but either of you have any thoughts on that?
In most of the collar counties, there is the PTEL, property tax extension limitation law,
Yeah.
which would limit some of the funding that they could get if your assessed value drops a significant amount. Hopefully that won't happen in the aggregate when you lower some of those commercial industrials, because you're not lowering the residential as much at this point. So hopefully that won't impact it as much.
And to the question, the part of the question that relates to whether there's chatter or discussion over whether there'll be legislation or funding, I certainly hope so. We're all going to have to reflect and adjust our lives. And I think that includes school districts tightening their belts just like everybody else is going to have to. And I think that, you know, I don't want to necessarily be the one to say it, but maybe it's going to mean some furlough days, or I mean, the whole education system is going to have to change. We don't even know if they're going back to school in the fall. So it's a great question that I think we need to keep reflecting on. And I hope that our legislators and our leaders are taking all of that into consideration. Because certainly if we drop the commercial values, there could potentially be an impact, and they're going to have to make adjustments too, just like all of us.
Just Bob, just relax.
Bob, relax. We'll get to it.
Well, going back to, I mean, what we started to touch on, you know, before, you know, how is this, if things go to border review, or if they end up, you know, before PTAB, I mean, where do you even start? And you know, what are those bodies? You know, how do you think that they may be operating in this environment? What's going through? We could probably have an entire show about inviting in folks from border review or from PTAB to come and chat with us about this. But, I mean, do you two have any thoughts on that?
I think it's important, you know, to work at the local level. You know, work with your taxpayers, your property owners, and, you know, try to resolve issues as locally as you can. Even at the board review, you know, work with them and try to provide some relief, some recognition of it. And then, because if it goes to PTAB, then, you know, you're looking at a years-long backlog, and then potential tax refund situations, which would damage the taxing bodies even further. So the reason I kind of like the thought of making changes locally here on a use basis, I think is where I'm going, is that then I'm going to do it uniformly. You know, uniformity is going to be real important at this point, because if you have one person that is represented by an attorney and they come in and get a relief, and the same exact property doesn't have that proactiveness and is going to end up with a higher assessment, higher tax bill, that's not fair to the whole scheme of things.
Yeah, Eleanor, when you've talked with your colleagues, have you guys started talking through how you even might approach something before, you know, border review or before PTAB?
Yeah, I mean, for some of the highly impacted properties that are high value that we don't have all the answers for now, I think what we're looking at is even where we wouldn't get an appraisal this year ordinarily, maybe we are going to get an appraisal, and we are going to see that appraisal have a data value with 1/1/20 and then some sort of post-COVID value. How that exactly plays out, I don't know, because again, you've got the issue of having market data to support your post-COVID value. And then how do you make the pro rata calculation between the portion of the year that was impacted versus wasn't? So there's that kind of chatter. But then, if you take a step back and you think about it, that's great for your big high-end client, but what about your mom and pop shop that they can't even afford the appraisal that you were going to get for them this year, and they've canceled it because they don't have the money? So it's a real tricky path. But I do want to reiterate what Jeff said, and that working with your local assessor, trying to get this done at the local level, being flexible, is all going to be very important going forward.
You really feel for those counties, especially who just finished their quad year, last year, and just completely, went through there, and, all those parcels, right?
You get increases in assessment, which are leading to increases in taxes, and it couldn't come at a worse time.
Yeah.
There's never a good time for a tax increase, obviously, but I mean, it's really difficult in this environment.
Ellen, now, of course, Cook County, they're on a different schedule. They do the county in thirds, if I remember right. I thought I read an article a few weeks ago that Assessor Kagi was considering revaluing the entire all of Cook. Is that? Do you have any insight about that? Or
he did make that a public statement, and he has some documents and information on his website that there is going to be a reassessment of all property. The real question is when and how.
Yeah.
That information is not yet available, and I'm sure that he's gathering information, reflecting, and reassessing within his own office, and determining the best way to move forward. We'll see. To be determined.
I think the one theme, right, that we sort of keep saying throughout this is there's so many ways we're saying in different methods. We don't know, right? So those who are watching, if you're confused and you're not sure, where to go or answers to questions, take heart that we're all in the same situation and we're all working through this together. So earlier we had touched on just the idea of property use moving forward and what that is going to look like. You've got companies who have sent thousands of workers home, for the past couple of months. Probably going to be a while before they start coming back, or will they start coming back? Are companies going to need the amount of office space that they currently have? Or if you're looking at a shopping mall, I think JCPenney just filed for bankruptcy, and another
Pier 1.
Thank you. It was right there. Thank you, Jeff. Pier 1 just fell. So you're starting to see some, more and more vacancies in shopping malls and shopping centers. I mean, Ellen, I'm assuming that you may represent some companies who have holdings like that. I mean, what are you seeing in the future use of some of those spaces?
Shopping malls and retail was already going through an evolution before COVID hit. With Amazon and online shopping and other
This just
trends.
sort of turned it up to 11.
This
right?
took it into hyper mode, and it makes it is now happening now to all types of properties, but that is going to be an area that's hit particularly hard because we don't know if malls are ever going to come back in the sense of a mall that we knew when we were kids. Same thing with office buildings. You've touched on that too. Like, are people going to want to ride up in an elevator with a whole bunch of other people and go and work in a cubicle? Interestingly, the trend had been for companies to start moving the younger people into the cities where they don't have cars and they're working in the office buildings and they walk everywhere. And now, are we going to see a change in that trend, which thereby impacts property values in that sense? And I think, I don't know if you mentioned it, there's also going to be the aspect, if you have a big office building, of cleaning it.
Right.
keeping it clean, the expenses going up on that. So we're going to see a lot of changes in the use of property, in addition to how we interact with that property. And that's actually going to probably drive our expenses up, lower our rental rates. And we'll have to see where it goes from there.
And in appraisal terms, I think we're looking at the several forms of obsolescence, economic obsolescence right now because of the loss of income and the increase in expenses, and then functional obsolescence is going to be something that's going to be in the future. Are these properties going to be desirable in the future, given the change in the uses and the change in everything that we're seeing? What's going to happen in the future is going to be very scary, very interesting. I'm just going to relax here, though.
Yeah, relax.
That's right. Remember to relax,
Relax.
reassess.
And we'll have to see what happens.
Yes. We had a question come in from Tammy Hort. She says, if assessments are due on assessments, are 1/1/20 date, should reductions be next year and not this year, since COVID happened after that date?
I've heard a lot of arguments, and there are several people talking about that it's not applicable for this year because of the lien date.
Yeah.
And I believe that's absolutely true, and you can make an argument for that. However, I still feel personally, and what my approach might be, is I need to provide some kind of relief. Even though it's not going to be a great deal of relief, I have to say, well, I'm trying to be proactive. I'm trying to recognize the facts that are right in front of me right now to help these people out even a little bit. Even if you're talking reducing it 5%, what does that really amount to in taxes? In the bigger scheme, it's not a lot of value, but it's, some kind of relief. And obviously looking forward, you can do more in 2021, and that may be more appropriate. And it's kind of be a jurisdictional issue to make that decision.
Well, I do believe that the Illinois statutes do provide a basis and a grounding and the authority for assessors to make adjustments regardless of the 1/1/20 date, because the statute specifically addresses disaster relief. It specifically addresses damage or destroyed property, and that clause and the language that the legislators used, unfit for customary use, absolutely applies. Maybe not to residential, but if I have a restaurant and I haven't been able to use my property, that is a direct impact and unfit for customary use.
Yeah, right. Especially a restaurant, maybe owned by a local family, or those mom and pop shops, that you had mentioned before, Ellen. I feel a heavy weight on those folks during this COVID-19, and really, being far more impacted than the national chain like a Chili's or something like that. Have you heard, Ellen, from any of your clients who are those smaller folks, and how they're sort of dealing with all this that's going on?
Honestly, I've probably heard less from my small mom and pops than I have from my nationwide type tenants, only because I think they're more in the weeds. They're trying to just make it through day by day and figure out how they can adjust their economic model to survive this storm. But the stuff I have heard is, hey, I can't afford my appraisal anymore. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm going to do my best to be as aggressive as possible with market data that I can find and sources that I can find and other ways to get you a reduction. So that's one of the really, really tricky parts of this too, is because we want to have equity.
Yeah, right.
But we know as human beings that the mom and pop shop is going to be struggling and more in the weeds probably than a national type chain. But
Yeah.
they may have, the national chain has more resources to potentially fight this. So the assessment. So it's tricky.
Yeah.
Hopefully the recovery is that they keep saying V shape and U shape and things like that. Hopefully it's more of a spike getting right back to normal. But I think the reality is going to be the U shape, or the gradual increase to back to normal.
And we're going to see innovation and creativity in how we use our properties. So that's going to be part of this situation as well.
Yeah, I think that's really going to be exciting to see how that comes forward. You've already seen, especially like in shopping malls we talked about earlier, stores that maybe used to be an anchor tenant being converted into apartments or being converted into library branches or things like that. It'll be exciting to see how some of those things continue to evolve and what happens in different communities around the country. Well, it's just about time to wrap up here. But before we go, Ellen, do you have any other parting thoughts you'd like to share with folks?
Relax.
That's key.
And it's an important part of it. It's an important part of the equation, and it's important to remember that we're all in this together.
Yeah. Jeff, any parting thoughts for the group?
The one thing I failed to mention is I spoke to some realtors who are in the market, and they're speculating that there's going to be improvements in these markets. So there are some deals happening. They're thinking that they're going to get it at a lower price, and when the rebound happens, they'll be in a good position. So let's hope that happens, that you get some people in the market doing some things, and we do rebound.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, Ellen Berkshire, Jeff Lee, hey, thank you both so much for being with us today. Appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts about commercial valuation and this time of pandemic that we're all experiencing. Quick note for everyone who is watching again next week. Wendy Ryerson, who's the IPAI Education Committee Chair, is going to be on talking about the CIAO Code of Conduct and also the new Ethics Committee that the IPAI formed to oversee that CIAO Code of Conduct. So be sure to tune in. Monday is Memorial Day, so happy Memorial Day to everyone. And if you ever need anything at all, don't hesitate to contact the IPAI. Even during this time of pandemic, we want to make sure we're doing all we can to provide resources that our students need in order to do their jobs and do them well. So that said, Ellen and Jeff, hey, thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
You bet. Take care, and we'll see all of you next week.
Bye-bye.